All right, let's talk about some of these burning questions for this NFC East teams. We'll start in that division. We'll start with the New York Giants, Rand. And look, man, few teams have crushed the offseason like the New York Giants. They've had a great start to finish from at the end of the season in January through where we are right now. Really good free agency, obviously really good draft with Abdul Carter traded back up to pick 25 to get Jackson Dart. I was watching a behind the scenes from the Giants website via their YouTubes about just the pressure that Joe Shane was apparently under trying to get back into the first round because it was clear to them they want Jackson Dart. Right around pick 18, they started making calls, and it was hard to find a partner until I believe Nick Caserio finally agreed to trade down from Houston. So dodged that bullet, so they got their quarterback. But the burning questions, and my burning question relates to Jackson Dart, but let's go with yours first. You asked, do they have enough offensive weapons to compete in the heavy NFC East? And, of course, it starts with Malik Neighbors. They didn't draft anybody early on. They did get Juice Wells out of Ole Miss. They have Zach Pascal, who they signed. Darius Slayton, who we know and whose sister we met at the Colorado Showcase. She works for Coach Prime there. And then Jalen Hyatt, who has not yet quite figured things out. So that's a fair question. And what is the answer? I'll ask you.
Well, my answer is no. And I'll just simply say, if you look at what the other secondaries in this division have, they have really strong secondaries. And we know what Malik Neighbors is. He's a legit number one receiver in this league. However, when you match him up against the Cowboys secondary and the Eagles secondary and the Commanders secondary, he's going to need that other person next to him that can make moves and that can get open and create one-on-one situations. And right now, I just don't see the Giants having that. I will say, though, this defense is built, to compete within the division. However, I just don't think they'll have enough offensive weapons to score points to keep up.
And the other concern is this, and the schedule came out last night, and if you need PR, I would encourage you to hire the NFL because they can make anything exciting. They make a commissioner reading names off a card the most exciting thing in the offseason. They make we knew all the teams that were going to face each other, but the fact that they had this huge schedule release, they made that exciting. And I mentioned that to say, good luck finding a team with a tougher schedule than the New York Giants. And that leads me to my burning question. And we knew coming into this offseason, because ownership had made it clear that they were running out of patience with Joe Shane and Brian Daboll. With jobs on the line, can the Giants be patient with Jackson Dart? Now, we say every year right after a team drafts a quarterback, we're going to be patient with him. And then when the rubber meets the road and you start off 1-4, things change. So can they afford to be patient? And if they do start off 1-4, when are we going to see Jackson Dart? Because I would imagine it's going to be sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and I agree. I think like you said, the big question is, can you be patient? And you were already talking about an offseason where the owner has come out and said that he's running out of patience. So that's the quagmire that you put yourself in when you take one of these quarterbacks that is going to need a little bit of time. And so, with this schedule, like you said, the NFL schedule makers did the Giants no favors. Them and the Cleveland Browns, who both teams have quarterback questions, and now you put them in this tough gauntlet of having probably the toughest two schedules in the league. I think you're going to see these guys very quickly, and then we'll see where John Mara and the rest of the owners sit, in terms of being patient with Daboll and Joe Shane.
Not knowing what the record will be and not trying to predict it, but knowing that the schedule is the toughest in the league according to strength of schedule based on last year, I'm going to give you a date, and you tell me whether we see Jackson Dart before or after that date. Halloween, October 31st.
Halloween, so that puts us at about how many games? 8, 9?
Weeks. Yeah, that's right.
About 8, 9. I'll go with it. I'm with you. I'll follow you there. I think we'll see him by then. And if you could look at that, find a win in there for him. On this front end of the schedule, find a win.
Maybe week 5 at New Orleans, only because we don't know who the quarterback's going to be in New Orleans, but sweet mercy alive. I don't know what Joe Shane and Brian Daboll did in their previous life to get this schedule, but I hope they've been doing a lot of praying between last night when the schedule came out and the start of the season, because, that's going to be a wild ride. We'll see. Maybe they'll be a playoff team and surprise us all. Next up, a team that is expected to be a playoff team every single year, and they usually win a lot of games and get to the playoffs and don't play so well. That, of course, is the Dallas Cowboys. They have a new coach, and they have a new wide receiver in George Pickens. Your burning question, can the Cowboys threaten the Eagles and Commanders for the division crown? On paper, I think so. It just feels like They can't seem to get out of their own way. Brian Schottenheimer is, of course, the coach. Fans weren't excited about it. That's just the reality of it. I think that's one of the reasons Jerry released the news on a Friday night. But here we are, Rand. So can the Cowboys threaten the Eagles and the Commanders for the division? All these teams in this division, Rand, have tough schedules. So in that sense, it's sort of balanced there. But what do you think about that?
Again, I'll go no. and I'll say, but I do think that this team is built to make the playoffs. And so I don't think that they'll beat the Commanders or the Eagles out for the division crown. However, I do think it's a strong possibility that they could be the third team in their division to make the playoffs. And I think the last time that's happened was in 2022 when it was the NFC East that had 3 teams to make the playoffs. So I could see the Cowboys factoring in that field there.
Yeah, and I believe the Steelers, the Ravens, and the Browns did it during Joe Flacco's year. That might have been 2023. So on the other side, we have seen it. It's just incredibly difficult. And here's a not-so-fun fact if you're a Cowboys fan via the CBS Sports Research Department. Dallas is the first team in NFL history with 6 straight games, 6 straight, versus teams that won at least 11 games last year. So, again, I would encourage Brian Schottenheimer to do some praying because it's going to be tough sledding. My burning question,
Ryan, if I could throw in on their schedule, they also have 4 Thursday night games.
So Jerry Jones made somebody angry in the front office is what I'm hearing. And the front office being the NFL front office, because I know that players certainly don't like Thursday night games. I would imagine ownership and front office staff don't like them either to certain degrees. You see the schedule here. My burning question is, Rand, how do you manage George Pickens, who obviously the Steelers were willing to move on from, even though he could legit be a top 5 wide receiver when he's locked in? The question is, when is he going to be locked in? How do you manage him in that locker room when he's also going in the final year of his rookie deal? He has said that he's willing to wait until after the season to get that new deal, but he said a lot of other things, too, that didn't necessarily play out the way the Steelers had hoped anyway.
Well, here's what I know about the Dallas Cowboys, and we've talked about this here, on the podcast. They have an ecosystem that supports quote-unquote troubled guys, and they've had the Pac-Man Joneses and the Alden Smiths and the Tank Johnson. So they understand how to do this, and they have a history of doing it. And again, he's on a 1-year prove-it deal, so to speak. And so in order for him to get his big payday that he's coveting, he's going to have to be on his best behavior. And I think we'll see that for at least a year, and we'll see what happens from there.
And to your previous point, this team actually on paper is lights out. Dak Prescott is one of the best quarterbacks in the league. CeeDee Lamb now has George Pickens. When you look at the other side of the ball, they've drafted really well this year. Donovan Ezra, who's the edge rusher. Subone Rebel is going to have a chance to start as a long outside corner. Tyler Booker was the 12th overall pick, the guard from Alabama, who's going to be probably a starter on day one. So, again, on paper, this feels like a team that's going in the right direction. We got like 45 seconds left. Let me ask you this. Is Brian Schottenheimer an upgrade over Mike McCarthy in terms of offensive play calling?
I say no. And, that's Gator on Gator crime there. Schotty played quarterback, on the 96 national championship team. But I'd say no, just because of McCarthy's history, and we've seen him do it and do it at a high level.
Yeah, and we'll find out together. And it was an interesting move, and Jerry Jones has made all these promises about how the team was going to do things that they ultimately didn't seem to do. The George Pickens thing is certainly a move in the right direction. We'll all find out together about the Cowboys and the Giants. When we come back, we're going to find out about the other 2 teams in this division, the 2 of the favorites, the Washington Commanders and the Philadelphia Eagles. And we'll start with Washington right after this break. Welcome back to With the First Pick, or as I like to call it, Rand's Party Town, because Rand is all about doing birthday parties in the summertime, so give him a call. He's got to do one for his soon-to-be 7-year-old, and he ain't following the rules. And by that I mean you, Rand. The rule is age plus 1 is how many people can come to the party. So your son's turning 7. It's going to be 8. So you having 8 people or more at that party?
It's going to be way more than that. I feel like most people that have RSVP'd are plus 8s. So it's going to be a big blowout for them.
Yeah, this ain't like my 1987 birthday party when it was just me and my family. My dad said, "Oh, just enjoy it. It's fun." It was a different time, man. All right, let's talk about the Washington Commanders. Speaking of different times, because that team has turned things around as soon as ownership changed, and as soon as Adam Peters came in as GM, and as soon as they drafted Jaden Daniels, having a franchise quarterback certainly helps. and they had a fantastic season last year. And I think Jaden Daniels is an example of someone who, when it clicks, he can go from being a mid-day 3 pick to being one of the best players in the draft and now the NFL. So that was a fun story. But the fun's over, Rand. Your burning question is this. Are you surprised that the Commanders didn't address their defensive end needs at any point during the offseason? And I'll guess the follow-up to that is that going to be an impediment to them getting where they want to get to?
Yeah, and I am surprised, especially when you consider head coach Dan Quinn's background as a defensive line coach and all the great defenses that he's had, whether it was in Seattle, Atlanta, and Dallas, they all had edge rush presence. And so right now you have Dorrance Armstrong, you have Cleveland Farrell as your primary edge guys. And I know they do some creative things with Frankie Louvu and they rush him off the edge and, get matchups for him. But like you said, I think this will be an impediment, if anything, for this defense to continue going forward because they've upgraded the secondary. I like what they've done with their additions in the secondary. Now you need to tie that with the rush. And I think they still need some guys off the edge.
Yeah, and by my count, they only had 5 picks in the draft. Josh Connerly Jr., not necessarily a surprise pick, but went to the bottom of the first round like we expected. You talked about the defensive additions. Trey Amos they drafted in the second round, had first-round talent, the cornerback out of Ole Miss. So they addressed some of their needs, but obviously not all of them, and sometimes that's hard to do in the draft, but certainly in free agency. We'll see how this works out. Jonathan Allen's gone, of course. Javon Kinlaw they signed. That's sort of a replacement quotation marks here. And, of course, Deron Payne's still there. And we'll see how they sort through all that because, again, this division is incredibly tough, and the schedule for this division is incredibly tough. And I'll just mention this. Washington has 8 standalone games, primetime games on an island, if you will, tied for most in the NFL with the Chiefs and the aforementioned Cowboys. You can see it here. Again, week 1 division matchup against the Giants in Washington. So that'll be the intrigue starts immediately for both those teams. My burning question for the Commanders, how do you build on the 2024 season and not get complacent? And you've been at places both in L.A. and San Francisco, and even in Atlanta, where you've had success. And how do you maintain that success and don't go into the season thinking, okay, we got most of the same guys back. We can just run it back and not be an issue. What's the coaching message? What's the front office message to sort of keep everyone laser focused on the task at hand?
And it's exactly what you said. It's don't get complacent. And if you know anything about Dan Quinn is one of the best motivators that we have in our league at the head coach position. So whether that's motivating coaches to motivate their players or just directly motivating the players, I think he has the it when it comes to that to get it done. And then again, they bring in a certain type of guy, a guy that has a certain type of edge, a certain type of drive, and just an overall certain type of leadership. That's what Adam Peters helped build in San Francisco, and that's what he's building now in Washington. So I don't expect him to have any type of lag at all when it comes to that.
All right, we know the Eagles are the favorites. I'll just ask you here, how close can the Commanders get to the Eagles in terms of making a run at the division?
I think if you pick one team within a division that can push them, it would be the Commanders. However, I just think from top to bottom, this Eagles team is just a little too deep at most places for them to really be pushed. Again, this is all barring injury and everyone staying healthy, but I still think the Eagles are the class of this division.
All right, let's talk about Philadelphia a little more in depth here. And we talked about this on Tuesday's podcast, how they've always had dudes over the last 3, 4, 5 years, but when they changed their coordinators who got head coaching jobs in Indianapolis and Arizona, they took a little dip, as you reminded me. They still made the playoffs, but they got the doors blown off in that playoff game, and then they had to reset, got Kellen Moore, got Vic Fangio, and they were back to cooking with gas. Kellen Moore's now in New Orleans, so they have a new OC. Vic Fangio's still there, but your larger point remains, top to bottom, good luck finding a better team, and that includes the team they whooped up on in the Super Bowl in the Kansas City Chiefs. Your burning question. Do the Eagles have enough on defense to repeat as champions? And my question to your question is, why do you think they don't have enough?
I think and I was just going through looking at their roster prior to coming on, and you look at it from top to bottom, again, it is one of the best rosters, if not the best roster in the league. And especially when you look at what they've done in the secondary. And then if you look at the guys that play, the linebacker at the second level position, if they're healthy, they'll be fine. And they have dogs on that defensive line, which they've always had. However, if you think about a Philly defensive front, you've always known them to have a plethora of dudes off the edge. And right now, you have Nolan Smith, who came on in his sophomore year. I think he led the team in sacks possibly. And then Jalen Hunt really came on in the Super Bowl. But outside of those two, you don't really have depth on the edge. And so someone in that room is going to have to step up to give them more depth there that they've always had and what they've always been known for.
Yeah, and that's a fair question. They drafted Ty Robinson, who's a defensive end. He's not an edge rusher, out of Nebraska. He was a fun watch during the course of the fall. And Kobe Dean's still banged up. The linebacker had that serious knee injury out of Georgia. Of course, they drafted Jahad Campbell and Smile Munden, so they may be set there no matter what Nakobe's health is going forward. Does Jalen Hunt still feel like a DPR, a designated pass rusher at this point? He's still incredibly raw, former safety that moved over there. Are you okay giving him more reps on first and second down, for example?
I mean, he's going to have to get reps regardless. That's the natural evolution of him becoming a full 3-down player. But I do see Jalen Hunt's role being similar to what Josh Sweat's role was early. And just coming in, being that fastball off the edge and the guy that's being able to be disruptive. And maybe they play a Jomo on the early downs and have him be the physical edge setter opposite of Nolan Smith, and then bring Jalen in to rush the passer in those creative packages. Now, they're still going to need another interior rusher, because Big Jordan Davis is a first and second down plugger. And so he's going to have to be able to, they're going to have to be able to find, someone next to, I'm just going to call him the animal, the man child over there on the other side, to be able to rush interior wise. So again, a little bit more questions than they probably had up front, but I think if anybody's going to be able to figure it out, it's Philly and defensive coordinator Vic Fangio.
Right. And Vic Fangio is going to be a big part of that success, because we've seen a couple of years ago when the defensive coordinator wasn't exactly on the same page with the defense, and things went sideways a little bit here. Here's my burning question, and we'll keep it to the offensive side of the ball because we just talked about the defense. And then my question says, other than unforeseen injuries, what's the biggest issue facing the offense in terms of getting back to where they want to get to? Because I don't know what it would be. I mean, the offensive coordinator is now Kevin Patulio, but other than that, I don't think he come in and change a lot, because if it ain't broke, sort of thinking here. So in your mind, what would potentially be a roadblock to this team getting back to where they want to get to?
I mean, you just said it, the new offensive coordinator, Kevin Patulio. We haven't seen him in this role. We don't know how he's going to be in terms of managing the different personalities, because you have to get AJ the ball. You're going to have to get Goddard the ball. You're going to have to get Devontae Smith the ball. So can he handle those personalities and then dial it up on a week-to-week basis? And so that's tough, and that's a tough thing to do, and he's never done it. And so we're going to have to grow with him. Even though he has all the talent in the world to get it done, he's still a first-time coordinator that's going to have to grow into this role.
They also have Cam Williams, who they drafted, the right tackle out of Texas, as depth there. They did lose Mekhi Becton. I think they'll be okay in terms of that. And I'm just going to say this, Rand. They drafted Kyle McCord-McGuy in the 6th round. They traded for DTR from Cleveland prior to that when they sent Kenny Pickett to Cleveland, and Tanner McKee's on the roster. What do they end up trading one of these players for after they ball out in the preseason? Because it feels like Howie Roseman knows what's up when he puts these guys on the roster.
My man Howie, he finds a way to get it done, get picks, and get probably more than most people would value for. But I think the number one guy that would probably get moved would be DTR, because he started games in this league. And then I think you would get a day 3 pick for him. Probably something higher than what they paid to get him. That's Howie's MO and how he rolls. But 9 times out of 10, if it's a team trading for him, it's a team that's desperate and needs a quarterback. Yeah,
they got a 5th round pick, I believe, when they made that trade. And our buddy Rick Spielman is quite familiar with Howie Roseman, because he had to give a 1st round pick after Teddy B went down to get your guy, Sam Bradford, back in the day. So Howie ain't playing.